Chinese government plots a new path forward for economic growth. Economics professor Jin Keyu breaks down the complexities of the new policies and shows us why China is headed in the right direction.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian. At the recent annual Central Economic Work Conference, China's top leadership revealed the economic performance of China in 2024 and decided the priorities for the economic work in the year ahead. The meeting urged efforts to vigorously boost consumption, improve investment efficiency, and expand domestic demand on all fronts. What trajectory will China's economy take in the coming year and beyond? What will be the new measures, and what does that mean for the country and also the rest of the world? To explore all of these issues, I spoke earlier with Jin Keyu, professor of economics at the London School of Economics. Professor Jin, good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's good to be with you again.
What are your observations so far of the general response coming from investors, the Chinese public, and also the media about the results, at least the direction of policies, as a result of the China Central Economic Work Conference?
Well, I think this has been a long-awaited policy stimulus and plan, and so of course it's very much welcomed. But people are looking for what's coming next. Of course, this is a signal for commitment for stronger actions in the future. I think the real question is how much of currently the stimulus will trickle to the real economy so that we can actually see an impact, especially on things like consumption. And that's still an if, because if a lot of these funds are used to be injected into the financial system or reduce local government debt, how much of that is left to really boost the real economy is still in question.
That's a very interesting question. Let's pursue a little bit on that direction. I remember in your latest book, China's Playbook, you talk about the role of local governments and suggest something called the mayor's economy, an interesting phenomenon, meaning the local mayors, they go out of their way in order to attract investment and put into places where they think is the potential for the economy to grow, for local GDP. But you also mentioned in the book there are two possible setbacks. One is it might lead to local government debts, further of that. And the other is there might be less attention devoted to consumption. Tell me more about your thoughts on how this is related to the earlier discussion.
Well, first of all, China has an incredible model at scaling up, and especially on supply and production. And the political economy model of the mayor economy accentuates that, accelerates that, because all of the various parts of the government with the private sector are acting in a very coordinated manner to scale and produce, but less focus is really on personal consumption. Now, because of the mayor economy, these mayors or provincial party secretaries or governors, of course, they have competition and they want to do more. And sometimes they will resort to more debt in order to expand their capacities. Now, most critically and most relevant for this discussion is the real estate sector. The real estate sector is not like any in other country as just a property sector. It's quasi-financial system, it's quasi-fiscal system, because local governments rely on land sales and property development to further boost their fiscal coffers and get the economy going. So, of course, it accelerated the speed of development, but the aftermath is very much also concomitant is the side effects of debt and potentially even moral hazard. And if I may just also answer the previous question again, it's really also a matter between choice and constraint. Have we thought about that? Choice of which policies would actually work, how much, where to implement. Also constraint, how can you stimulate an economy without an explosive debt again? I think that's a lingering dilemma.
When we talk about the local economy, we have seen the overcapacity issue building up in certain industries. For example, they all jam to certain sectors of the so-called green transformation. EVs is an example of that. Now, many companies prefer to invest overseas rather than just in China. That's another story. But how do you see this overcapacity issue related to what you have just mentioned about the mayor's economy?
Well, first of all, the focus has always been on supply, not enough on demand. I think the policy pivot this time around is really to focus more on demand. But this also, requires a lot of deftness of policy and skill in navigating that. And we will have to wait to see what the impact of that is. And I think the competition in China is one of the most ferocious. And that's why China's products are also at the frontier of the world in practice. So I think China does have to shift towards more about how to absorb its supply rather than just exporting. Of course, that has been a long-term problem. And of course, now local governments with less capacity and more constraint of indebtedness, they're actually not going to be able to subsidize the industries and do a lot in that sense. So maybe that will reduce some of the overcapacity pressures going forward.
But if we look at the details, how will those local government debt be in a way dealt with? Mainly you are seeing policies toward directions like lower the interest rate from the banks when the local governments were borrowing from the banks. But that means less income for the banks. And the banks in China are very much related to also the overall state economy to a certain extent. So how do you see some debate about whether it's about money from one pocket moving to the other pockets, but the overall picture might not change that much? We see different kind of debates going on in China about all of these.
Yes, I think in China, we don't really believe as much in the Keynesian stimulus impact, right? One thing gets the wheel going, you get, the private companies to hire more workers spend more, and it gets going. We don't really believe in these kind of demand boosters as much as the US and Europe, but I think it's time to try it out. I also think that look, the economics 101, what does it teach you? It teaches you that in recessions, you have to spend more, right? There should be greater government expenditure in recessions rather than contraction. And if you're practicing something like austerity, where you raise taxes and reduce government spending, it will worsen the problem. But do we have the tolerance for more debt, for more expenditures? It's kind of counterintuitive, but that's actually what you should do. Now, of course, the central government believes that trading some time for space is one of the methods. So give them time to resolve their own problems rather than just massively, kind of write off their debt. There's so much constraint here. So I think we have to appreciate that the government is doing what it can between this constrained choice, right? No perfect world here.
We see a sea change of logic now, almost you could argue, in the policy as a result of the Central Economic Work Conference this time. It is about now the possibilities of increased deficit. It has been the same number in China for years. And this is the very first time that we are seeing the flexibility of that official number. What does that mean?
They are actively considering a much more expansive fiscal policy, more tolerance for fiscal deficit, more flexibility on the central government level. Look, we're talking about a very complex relationship between the central and local governments, whether it's sharing responsibilities or sharing of revenues, but also monitoring and the moral hazard problem we just spoke about. So what it means is that it's committed to a path of sustainably transferring more resources to the local government level. But again, I come back to the first question, where how much of that is actually going to be really useful in trickling down to the real economy is a real question.
Right. That's so much related to what I want to ask Keyu, because some economists have been arguing that earlier we have a bigger invisible deficit. And now the policies seem to suggest we could have a visible, bigger deficit. Do you see it that way? It's only translating from the invisible to the visible, or actually there are, changes of real nature?
There has been an explosion of shadow banking, let's not forget. And after 2015, the main policy mandate was to cool down an economy that was considered easily heated up and very seldomly cooled down. So that was the main mandate. And subsequently, there was a huge monetary tightening scheme. Now, this is moving from the off-balance sheet to on-balance sheet, or making things transparent. Making debt transparent is very, very important. It's not just about moving from one area to another, but it's to understand exactly what you were saying. What's the numbers? What's the time? What's the space? How much? How to do it? Without that kind of clarity, it is very difficult to coordinate on a national level and at a local level how to deal with the debt issues going forward. So you have to bring it to the forefront.
So you do suggest that it seems to me that it is translating from invisible to now visible, but the specific increase of deficit may not necessarily change that much. Is that what you're trying to say?
People, many countries are very hung up about a particular number. Like Europe is, inflation targeting, or a very strict, 3% deficit also for all these European countries. And we have seen how that rigidity has worsened lots of economic crises. The magic thing about policy is that it is a tool, and it should be flexible. And more flexible it is, the better it is. Just like the exchange rate. The point about flexible exchange rate is that it can respond. Now, we don't have a flexible exchange. We have all kinds of other constraints. So I think being too fixated on a particular number is not really appropriate for China. I think all this it means is that it means that there's going to be more central government. Look, the central government has the capacity to borrow more. Right? Not the local government, but the central government. If China wants to issue more bonds to the rest of the world, it can easily do that at the central level.
So you are saying, to me, it seems there needs to be mentality change in China's economic policy making. The possibility of test and trial, and also try to see what is the best way forward, back and forth. Do you see there's enough preparedness for that? Meanwhile, can China's economy of this size be able to afford it? Those are always the questions being asked, isn't it, when it comes to policy changes in China?
I think it's flexibility, and it's a coordinated set of policies between monetary, fiscal, and other kinds, and the ability to maneuver between them. And as you said, trial and test, which China has a lot less political constraints than a country like the US. So there are some natural advantages. And by the way, the US has had 12 economic recessions in the last 100 years. I don't know how many you count in China, but they're not many. Maybe this is the second. So the cycles of up and down are normal. And I think China is getting accustomed to looking at what kind of policy tools will be most effective. And again, it's a matter of choice and constraint. Look, this economy, this size, yes, absolutely. I believe that with the right policies in place, with a significant boost to confidence, but of course that's difficult, with proper aid to the, assistance to the real estate sector, and more leeway, more focus on the demand side. Look, I think there's a lot of people who believe internationally that China has bottomed out.
You mentioned one word, cycle. That came with a ding to my mind, because there's another debate going on about what is the real nature of what we're seeing in the Chinese economy. Is it really coming in cycles and we are in one obvious cycle of it, or it is in the process of transformation and we are in a place that we do not know and we'll have to in retrospect to understand better. Which one is this from your perspective, Professor Jin?
I really think that let's not underestimate the cyclical component part of this, that lack of aggregate demand, which is reflected in the falling prices or disinflation at the very least, or lack of demand. And that you need the proper medicine remedy to take care of lack of aggregate demand. At the same time, I do not agree with lots of people saying there's structural issues like demographics or aging. I do not think that that is China's main problem, low productivity. The structural problem that I do see is, as what we also mentioned, the real estate sector as acting as a quasi-financial and fiscal system. And unless you really solve this fundamentally, right? Where's the growth coming from? Where is the resources from the local government? How are they going to use these resources that's absent as property? Because property right now is back to pre-2015. That's the real deeper structural issue. So it's a combination of both.
Supply and demand isn't part of the trade of an economist is to discuss that throughout your life. But this is another question applied to China right now. A supply and demand overcapacity issue has been talked about, whether China sees it as a geopolitical trap or not, but certainly supply and demand is a very critical question facing the economy right now. What do you make of that, especially now, if you look at China's GDP number vis-a-vis its manufacturing capacity worldwide, there seems to be quite a difference. How do you understand China's ambitions and the reality?
Right. Well, when we talk about overcapacity, we really have to focus on overcapacity at what level, at where, right? Overcapacity at a national level is not overcapacity if there's no overcapacity in the global economy. You talk about EVs, you have too many EVs that you can sell, that you can consume domestically, but worldwide, given the global transformation, there is a huge surge in demand for things like solar panels and EVs and other green technology. So there's no overcapacity at the global level, and hence there is trade. Now, China, because of its natural advantages, because of the policy advantages and political economy, it is extremely efficient in churning out manufacturing at scale. There is no other country that can compete. It is more than the next 9 countries combined. That is China's strength. And I think it has significantly lessened or made the supply chains more efficient at the global level. And I think the countries realize that. Now, the question is, we have to turn inward. The trend that you were talking about, the structural trend, is that China is becoming bigger and bigger and closed and more closed and more like the US. What I mean is, over time, as it gets richer, naturally the export share of its economy is going to shrink. And that's exactly what's happening. China produces a lot, but its export share is actually falling behind production level. And that's a natural trend that China should go forward with. But again, coming back to the short-term demand question, you want people to spend. And there are ways to get people to spend. Inflation is one of them, right? You get people to spend if there's inflation. I think that China can use a healthy dose of inflation.
We recently have noticed some interesting phenomenon. Right before the new year, we see some doses of goodwill, at least the good words, coming from Beijing and Washington toward one another, especially between the Chinese government, some diplomats, and also the president-elect in the United States, talking about China, US, if we do something together, it can be really good for the world. Now, do you see that's only rhetorically a gesture of goodwill before more real actions from both sides as the government changes in Washington? Professor Jin.
Well, first of all, I think setting the tone is still very, very important, right? It's a signal to the world of what's coming next. And are we in a more communicative state, or are we in a complete antagonistic state? Yeah, exactly. I think that's very important to set. I do think that Trump this time around might play a slightly different strategy from the first time. Before he came the first time around, very few anti-China voices. So he wanted to be the first to be anti-China. And now in the US, everyone has, gathered around that core principle. So he wants to be a bit different and might be willing to negotiate more with China. So he's full of surprises. So I don't know what's going to happen. But still, that said, China has long prepared for this, right? Independent whether he was going to be elected or not. Ever since the first trade war, Chinese companies have totally started a globalization frenzy. They've looked everywhere. They've actually optimized some of their business models because of it, by moving some of the factories to Vietnam and Mexico, but also searching for more global factors. So there has been a global diversification strategy also on China's side, and it forced them to think more broadly. And so this is not coming as a surprise, I would say, but there is certainly room for negotiation and talks between the two countries.
How much space China has managed to make itself to maneuver? I mean, through trade, for example, with ASEAN countries. Asia is really the hotspot, as many people are seeing in terms of trade development, and also with a quote-unquote global south, whether that's a geopolitical term or not, but mainly with emerging economies and developing countries.
I think that we're going to see going in the future, especially with Trump's reelection, but also the Western economy's greater tendency towards protectionism, there will be a more global fragmentation in terms of trade relationships as well. So many more regional trade agreements and much stronger regional cooperations. And we're seeing that in action. So certainly it has pushed lots of countries together. And to cite you another piece of evidence, actually lots of countries have used the US-China trade war to further and expand their own export platforms. And this is not just Mexico and Vietnam, but plenty of other countries that export more to the world because of this. And so people are always searching, or countries are always searching for arbitrage opportunities. And so what's China's response? It is an opportunity, right? It's an opportunity to strengthen alliances, make stronger your regional ties, search for new partners, and be really open to more opportunities than ever was the case, I guess.
Where would the money come from, or where would the money go? That's always an important question for any economist. When it comes to encourage domestic consumption, whatever the adjective or adverb we want to use, where would the money go? Is it going to be going to manufacturing and industries and businesses, or is the money should be going directly to the hands of consumers? Keyu, you know so well, there's a huge debate now in China before the dust is settling down. Which side are you on, or sitting in the middle?
I am, this is a tough question because, we have to experiment, right?
Yeah.
I think things like expiring consumer vouchers will be able to boost consumption in the short term. The conventional wisdom is that these short-term boosts will eventually start the cycle and then hopefully become a sustainable one. Although I'm not sure this is what the Chinese government really believes that will happen. So they're looking for a more sustainable increase in consumption. Look, unemployment is one of the big factors, right? Unemployment rate is significant now, and could there be sustainable wage growth, I think is at the bottom of why people are more hesitant to consume. But yes, directly to the households, more directly to the service industries, get the young people to come out and spend and hopefully start that cycle.
You talk about young people. One of my favorite subjects, and also one of the favorite subjects in your new book, China's New Playbook. You talk about generational differences, huge ones, between those born in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and the new millennium generation. How different are they in an economy such as this, which is not necessarily growing as fast as it used to be? Are there real much difference in their spending and in their habits?
Massively. In fact, Chinese new generation are inventing new ways of consuming and spending and having fun more than anything else I've seen in the world. And they are very, very resilient and adapted to the circumstances of the day. First of all, compared to the older generations, they're more focused on spending rather than saving. They spend much more on entertainment, clothes, traveling. They want to have a good time. They are no longer just interested in working hard all the time. So this is why I think that they do represent a sea change in terms of consumption dynamics. But if you look around the second-tier cities, they are all new kind of forms of socializing, social clubs, clubs that have both restaurants and cinemas and talk show hosts all in one space. These are new forms. So the new Chinese consumers, they want to have a good time, right?
Have a good time, have a new experience, isn't it? That's always they're looking at. Having said that, though, international luxury brands, they are always the most, the sensitive one to what are the consumption habits of different generations. We do not see necessarily a dramatic increase of those products consumptions in China, particularly over the past few years. You also see an interesting new trend. I'm sure you know this very well, Keyu, so-called cheaper alternatives, 平替,
Yes.
Which is, China manufactured products, much cheaper than the luxury goods, but delivers similar, a little bit less, but similar results, and becoming a new fad. How do you see this? What does that mean for the new consumption habits?
Well, first of all, the luxury companies internationally, globally, really have to study the new generations and how fast they are, how quick they are on their feet to adapt to the new reality. And that's exactly what I was speaking about earlier, which is that the economic situation is not great, but they still want to have a good time. So they invent ways to have a great time without having to spend much. And, this is something that the international companies really have to understand, very closely follow the mentality. I think that it means very different things for different segments of luxury, whether it's at the top international jewelry or whether you're, high street sneakers, that's a very, very different thing. And that represents different kinds of opportunities. But the key here is there's a whole mentality change. China is no longer going to be about Foxconn workers working 3 shifts a night just to earn that $3, right? It's going to be a more balanced society where there's more work and play, and hence maybe even solve some of the problems you talked about in terms of imbalances and overcapacity.
Are you worried about the new generation laying flat, 躺平, so to speak?
I love these adages. We keep on changing them every 3 months because there's a new phenomenon.
Absolutely.
So it's hard to keep up. I think if 躺平 means relax, hey, why not? Yes, I think we all need a little bit relaxed, but if it means giving up, that's not really a good sign.
Jin Keyu, I know you've been traveling back and forth between China, United States, Europe, and many other places around the world. Let's see how the world will change and what is the context for the Chinese economy. Thank you so much, Professor Jin Keyu from the London School of Economics. Really appreciate it. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight. Check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for being with us. Bye for now.